I used to think my husband David was the most confident man I'd ever met. When we first started dating 7 years ago, his unwavering certainty about everything seemed charming, even attractive. He knew which restaurant had the best pasta, which route would avoid traffic, which movie would be worth our time. He spoke with such authority that I found myself nodding along, swept up in his assurance. My name is Sarah, and I'm a high school English teacher. I've always been more of a question asker than an answer giver, someone who sees multiple sides to every situation. David, on the other hand, is a software engineer who approaches life like a series of problems with definitive solutions. In the beginning, I thought we complemented each other perfectly. David stands about 6 feet tall with sandy brown hair that he keeps meticulously styled, even on weekends. He has these piercing blue eyes that seem to calculate everything they see. He's methodical in everything he does, from organizing his closet by color and season to planning our vacations with spreadsheets that account for every possible scenario. His co-workers respect him, his family adores him, and our friends often come to him for advice. To the outside world, David Mitchell is a man who has his life figured out. But I know something they don't. In our 7 years together, 3 of them married, I have never once heard my husband admit he was wrong about anything. Not once. The first time I really noticed this pattern was about 2 years into our relationship. We were driving to my sister Emma's wedding in upstate New York, and David insisted he knew a shortcut. I suggested we use the GPS, but he waved me off with that confident smile of his. Trust me, Sarah. I drove through this area during college. I know these roads like the back of my hand. 3 hours later, we were hopelessly lost on some backwoods highway, and I was frantically calling Emma to explain why we'd missed the ceremony entirely. When we finally arrived at the reception, David greeted my family with his usual charm, explaining how construction delays and poor signage had caused our delay. He never mentioned his shortcut or acknowledged that following GPS directions might have been the better choice. That night in our hotel room, I brought it up gently. Maybe next time we should just stick to the main routes. He looked at me with genuine confusion. Why? We would have been fine if they hadn't changed the road layout since I was there last. How was I supposed to know they'd moved the exit? This became the pattern. David's mistakes were always caused by external factors, bad information, or circumstances beyond his control. The universe was constantly conspiring to make his perfectly logical decisions appear wrong. When he accidentally deleted an important work file because he skipped the backup process, it was because the new system interface was poorly designed. When he forgot our anniversary dinner reservation, it was because they should have sent a confirmation email. When he assembled our bookshelf backwards and had to start over, it was because the instructions were unclear and the diagrams were misleading. Emma, my younger sister, noticed it too. She's a pediatric nurse with dark curls and a no-nonsense attitude inherited from our mother. During family gatherings, she'd catch my eye whenever David launched into one of his explanations, raising her eyebrows in that way that said, "Is he serious right now?" "Sarah," she told me privately after last Thanksgiving, "you know he put the turkey in upside down, right?" And then spent 20 minutes explaining to Dad how the roasting pan was defectively designed, when it wouldn't cook evenly. Did know. I'd wanted to say something, but I'd learned it was easier to just let David maintain his narrative than to challenge him. Confronting his version of events never led to acknowledgement. It only prompted more elaborate explanations about why his logic had been sound despite the unfortunate outcome. My friend Jessica, who's known me since college, has been more direct about her concerns. She's a divorce lawyer with short red hair and a sharp tongue, and she's seen enough marriages implode to recognize warning signs. "It's not just about being wrong, Sarah," she said over coffee last month. "It's about respect. When someone can't admit mistakes to their partner, they're essentially saying their ego is more important than honesty in the relationship." But David isn't malicious or deliberately deceptive. He genuinely seems to believe his own explanations. When he rear-ended a car at a red light last summer, he explained to the police officer, the other driver, and later to me that the brake pedal had felt spongy, and the car had clearly been having mechanical issues. The mechanic found nothing wrong with our brakes, but David maintains to this day that it was obviously an intermittent problem that didn't show up during testing. The credit card incident was what really opened my eyes to how deep this pattern runs. David had insisted on handling all our finances when we got married, claiming his engineering background made him naturally better with numbers and logical systems. I trusted him, and for 2 years I never looked at our statements. Then we were denied for a mortgage pre-approval. Sitting in the loan officer's sterile office, I learned that David had been consistently late on our credit card payments, sometimes by weeks. Our credit score had plummeted. The loan officer, a kind middle-aged woman named Mrs. Chen, showed us the payment history with obvious sympathy. In the car afterward, I waited for David to acknowledge what had happened. Instead, he launched into a detailed explanation about how the credit card company had changed their payment processing system, and how the new online interface was confusing, and how they should have sent better notifications about the due date changes. "David," I said quietly, "the due date has been the same for 3 years. It's printed right on the statement." He looked at me with that same genuine confusion I'd seen so many times before. "Sarah, you weren't managing this account. You don't understand how complicated their system became. They made it deliberately confusing to generate late fees." That night I looked through 2 years of statements. The due date had never changed. The online interface looked identical to every other credit card website I'd ever used. David had simply been disorganized and had consistently forgotten to pay on time. But in his mind, he had crafted a complex narrative where external forces had conspired against his otherwise perfect financial management. I realized then that David doesn't just refuse to admit mistakes. He literally cannot see them as mistakes. In his mental framework, he makes sound decisions based on available information, and when things go wrong, it's because that information was faulty, incomplete, or deliberately misleading. He's not lying to me. He's lying to himself so effectively that his version of events becomes his reality. This realization was both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because I finally understood that his inability to admit fault wasn't personal. It wasn't that he didn't respect me enough to be honest, but rather that he couldn't access honesty about his own fallibility. Terrifying because I realized I was married to someone who would never be able to take responsibility for hurting me, disappointing me, or letting me down. Our marriage has become a careful dance around David's infallibility. I've learned to plan backup routes when he insists on directions. I manage our finances now, though David still explains this as a way to free up his time for more complex decisions. I make restaurant reservations under my name and send myself calendar reminders about important dates. I've essentially built a parallel system to catch his mistakes before they become problems, while allowing him to maintain his belief that his systems are flawless. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I simply stopped covering for him. What if I let him navigate us to the wrong location, miss the dinner reservation, forget to pay the bills? Would the accumulation of consequences eventually break through his psychological armor? Or would he just construct more elaborate explanations, building higher walls around his fragile ego? Emma thinks I should give him an ultimatum. Jessica thinks I should start documenting everything for an eventual divorce. My mother, ever the peacekeeper, suggests marriage counseling, though I can't imagine David agreeing to attend sessions premised on the idea that he might need to change something about himself. I love David. I love his intelligence, his dedication to his work, his loyalty to his family. I love how he sings off-key in the shower and how he always brings me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. But I'm lonely in a way that's hard to explain to people. I'm lonely for a partner who can say, "I was wrong, I'm sorry," and mean it. I'm lonely for someone who can learn from mistakes instead of explaining them away. Last week, David accidentally threw away my grandmother's antique brooch while organizing our bedroom. When I found it in the trash and asked what happened, he explained that it had been mixed in with some old jewelry that looked like costume pieces, and that I should have stored important items more clearly in the future. Standing there holding my grandmother's brooch, still smelling of coffee grounds and banana peels, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in me. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't nod along with his explanation. I didn't accept his logic or adapt my behavior to prevent future misunderstandings. David, I said, you threw away something that was important to me. I need you to acknowledge that you made a mistake. He looked at me with those calculating blue eyes, and I could almost see him constructing his response, building the framework that would transform his error into a reasonable action based on insufficient information. Sarah, he began, if you had clearly communicated the value of that piece. I walked away while he was still talking. I'm writing this sitting in Emma's apartment, the brooch cleaned and safe in my jewelry box. David has called 4 times, leaving increasingly detailed voicemails about why my reaction was disproportionate to the circumstances, and how we need to establish better communication protocols for important items. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if David will ever be capable of the kind of accountability I need in a partner, or if I'm strong enough to keep living in a world where nothing is ever his fault. What I do know is that I'm tired of being the only one in our marriage who's allowed to be wrong. For now, that's enough truth for one day.